Now, when it comes to watches for the everyday that have some heritage involved with them, have versatility as well, and some military connection, when you factor all those things together, I think the field watch is just the best way to epitomize that kind of idea and bringing things together. And field watches, in terms of popularity, some probably the most popular, useful watches on a day-to-day basis. So in this video, we're going to be looking at about 10 to 15 of some of the best field watches that you can buy, from affordable all the way up to luxury. Now, in terms of some ground rules before we begin this video, field watches in regards to what just actually qualifies to be considered a field watch, it's a little bit gray compared to some other types of watches out there. There's kind of some overlap with, I would say, some Fliegers, pilot watches, but going to just kind of keep it pretty loose here. Should be used for on the field type of work in regards to that, having some water resistance, clean legible dials, and also being rugged with their build construction. In terms of price and budget, we're going to start with kind of the more affordable end and then move our way up. I'm not very familiar with many really high-end field watches. It's typically a range of watches that sometimes are going to be issued for actual military personnel. So when that's usually the case, things tend to get a little bit more towards the affordable end. So that's one thing to consider. And then also, just so this one doesn't get too crazy, going to keep this just to mechanical watches, so either hand wound or automatic. And I'm also going to refrain from mentioning any micro brands because that just opens this thing up for basically including everything. Yes, Laurier is a good brand, Lumtech as well being perhaps mentioned in here. I just don't want to go down that path because I don't want this video to be like 40 minutes long. Now, before we jump into this video, a couple announcements, one being the giveaway that is going on. If you want to enter, fill out the form down below, pick out a few watches from TeddyBaldassarre.com, follow the form, and you'll be good to go. We'll be announcing that winner here probably in the next month or so. So definitely stay tuned for that. In addition, also some exciting updates on the store. So for one, we just launched Zodiac as a brand, have a cool neon collection available with the Zodiac Seawolf GMT. So definitely go check those out, links in the description. But let's first start with our watch here to begin with the Orient Defender 2. So the Orient Defender 2 is kind of like a hybrid eyes approach to a field watch. One will have that traditional 12-hour scale, but also has this tactical look and a 24-hour scale also on the dial. So the Generation 1 had a kind of more pedestrian movement in it compared to the newer one. So this one does come with hacking, and I think for the money here is going to be a good value-packed option. Wearability, 42 millimeters with case size, but the lug to lug is at 48.8 millimeters, so just shy of 49 millimeters. It's gonna make this one wear closer to a 41 millimeter case. Still probably a bit too large for some of those individuals out there with smaller wrists, but one to certainly consider. 100 meters of water resistance, in-house movement, and a interesting display compared to a lot of the other field watches on this list, so did want to mention it. So now next up, this is a watch that just finished up reviewing, and that is the RPG27. So now this is a new line of Seiko 5 models. There are a few different variants available. I did a full in-depth review of this one, so I can link to it down below, but basically taking a lot of the aspects of the new Seiko 5s that have been kind of rolled out over the last probably several, I would say 12 to 24 months mostly, and taking that and then fusing it with the popular field watches from the past from Seiko with their Seiko 5 collection with the SNKs and the SNZGs. So this one's going to kind of be more in line with, I would say, for those SNZGs, primarily because of the date complication, kind of being right in between in terms of case size, but also 100 meters of water resistance. And the number one reason why this one probably stands out is it's going to have an upgraded movement with the 4R family of calibers inside compared to the 7S movements that were going to be in those previous versions. This one wears a little bit closer to a 40 millimeter case if you had to put out a true estimate. Because the lug to lug is around 48 millimeters, that is going to probably line it up more in line with that. But 100 meters of water resistance, upgraded movement within, while getting a lot of versatility when it comes to strap with a lug width of 20 millimeters, makes this one a great entry-level option when it comes to field watches. All right, so now for some entry-level military issued timepieces. Kind of two brands to mention here is kind of honorable mentions. One being Marathon with their general purpose. So there are a few different variations to go for here. 34 millimeters. This thing is very small. So maybe for somebody that's a bit younger, maybe a teenager or something like that, or somebody who is just loves small wearing dimensions on their wrist, very small there. But you also have CWC, which has a ton of heritage and prestige in the world of field watches. During the 1970s, were actually adopted by the Ministry of Defense from Great Britain. So definitely something working in their favor when you're looking at field watches in this general range. Next up, we have the Bulova Hack watch, and I'm a personal huge fan of this one just because it kind of leans into that kind of Saving Private Ryan look, for lack of a better kind of terminology here. 38 millimeters with its case size. It is a bit thicker with the case because it does have an automatic Miyota within. This one does feature hacking, does have a 47 millimeter lug-to-lug. Water resistance is a little subpar here compared to the rest of the competition, so that is one unfortunate downside of this one, but the looks, how striking this one is underneath the macro lens and in photos, definitely cannot go just overlooked, and probably won't be going overlooked if you just look at these clips. This thing really is striking to look at, whereas closer to a 39 to 40 millimeter case. And I was very surprised when you're talking about Bulova and their history. A lot of people, when I remember posting some photos of this, like, oh, they just copied Hamilton, but Bulova has history and back to World War II in regards to actually being issued military field watches. Many brands were actually developing A10 field watches for the U.S. Armed Forces during the war, and Bulova and Hamilton had contributions here, so both of them have their own history. In addition, Bulova built their dual internal bezel A15 specifically for pilots, so a lot of things to be said here in regards to connection to military use and field watches when it comes to Bulova. Now, I was a little bit hesitant to mention this watch on the list here just because they've become a bit more difficult to get your hands on as new change in ownership. Invicta's now own Glycine, and that has of course changed the direction of the brand, unfortunately. But in regards to finding these watches out there, they're sometimes available at different sellers online, and they are very good watches and typically competitively priced. That is the Glycine Combat 6. Now, I have owned the Glycine Combat Sub, big fan of those watches, just a little bit too large for me. That was one of those watches that was just one of my first dive watches that I owned when I was first getting into things. But Glycine, also some kind of rich history in regards to connection to military issued field watches and just military watches in general. There's a lot of vintage Glycines available at PXs during the Vietnam War as being one of the emphasis points of this. You also have the Airman and what was done there. So a lot of military history in regards to what is going on with Glycine. These again are typically priced around $500-600. They used to be even cheaper than that when you would look online. So I don't know what the current status of the market is, but I know I would get comments if I didn't mention Glycine in a list like this, and these are certainly ones to look at if you're going for a traditional field watch. Okay, so now for the most obvious choices on the list here today, looking at Hamilton, and when you're talking about field watches, the khaki collection are some of the best that you can go for. In terms of probably the no-brainers, the Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical is going to be probably the best option in regards to being a little bit true to the vintage pieces that Hamilton were creating in the past for military use. But also you could go for the Khaki Auto, which is going to have up water resistance at 100 meters. That one, as well as the Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical Black PVD. That's one I personally own and probably my favorite from the collection. It's a little bit more tactical. Yes, PVD does have some downsides because it is just more of a surface coating and process in regards to what it is doing. But typically Hamilton, for the price range compared to a lot of other brands out there, do a much better job for a more attainable range. You can also go for the Hamilton Khaki Murph, which is going to appeal to a different type of crowd with the film connection, the Eureka and Morse code across the actual second hand. So a different appeal with that watch, but the entire Khaki Field collection, Hamilton and their history in regards to what they were doing in this field, probably some of the richest in the price category in terms of what you're getting for the dollar amount too. No question, some of the best as well. Now next up, we're gonna jump back to Seiko, and I don't think many people consider this, but when looking at Seiko, many probably just automatically think, hey, dive watches, and dive watches, but in the earlier parts of their history, field watches were a huge part of their DNA until dive watches and just the technology to really match what was needed from a recreational point as well as a professional commercial point was able to catch up. And in this period, looking back to the first Laurel watch as well as the 1959 Seiko Alpinist Laurel watch, the field watch design was very important, and those original Alpinist watches were developed for Japanese mountaineers, and we're looking at it from a just modern perspective. So I've owned a few different Alpinist models, the SARB 017 probably being the most popular one out there with its green dial, the dual kind of crown internal compass. But nowadays when looking at Seiko, there's quite a few different options to choose from. But the model we're going to be looking at here is the SPB 157. I have a full in-depth review. This one is going to deviate from those SPB 119s, the 121s, the 123s that are going to be a bit more in line with the SARB 017. but is going to also offer, I would say, pretty reasonable wear and more traditional field watch design compared to a lot of these other ones with the crown at the 3 o'clock and just a bit more straightforward that can also probably lean into some more dressy scenarios as well. Like many are familiar, these are pretty much over manufactured when it comes to water resistance. So 200 meters here, sapphire crystal, nice wearing dimensions on these, and also getting the new 6R movements within, which is going to have a 70-hour power reserve. So this is a great just set it and forget it type of watch, and really good power reserve to have that kind of competes pretty well with a lot of these ETA calibers or these modified ETA calibers that are going to be found in Swatch Group brands like that of Hamilton. All right, so next up we have the Sinn 556, and it's actually the watch I'm wearing on my wrist here today for this video. Really love this watch, enjoy it tremendously. Do want to mention though, honorable mention for the Damasco DS30. You could make a strong argument there in a good case that is perhaps better value. I personally just like the Sinn 556 in terms of looks a bit more, but the Damasco cannot be overlooked as well. Now, Sinn was founded by a German flight instructor back around 60 years ago, and much of the DNA of the 556, I think, combines some field watch elements as well as that pilot DNA, and you probably could have it fit in either of the buckets in terms of what it is going for, but the Sinn 556 can really throw anything you throw at it. I think the H-Link bracelet is one of the best in the price categories, minus the clasp. The clasp is a little bit behind the rest of the links in the structure of the watch itself, but 38.5 millimeters wears really true to that dimension, nice compact lug-to-lug dimension, 200 meters of water resistance, double AR coating on the crystal as well, so the amount of just vividness that you have with this dial and just the hands just popping out at you, it is a very striking watch. I think some people would say it's a little plain Jane, what, you know, that's gonna be some people's opinions of things, but when you're going for a field watch, you think about the actual utility factor and what you're going for, as well as the intended use case for these when they were first invented. I think there is a lot of reason behind why it looks the way it does, and I'm personally a big fan of it. So now let's look into luxury watches, and I'll just throw an honorable mention out there. This watch was discontinued, unfortunately, the Tudor Ranger, a very nice option for a field watch in this range, but didn't want to mention it more than that just because it has been discontinued. But to kind of step up from the Sinn 556 in a, I would say, style that very much that Sinn 556 emulates is the Mark 18 from IWC. I see this watch as almost kind of being the bigger brother of those watches. Again, you probably could make the claim that these are just as much pilot watches as they are field watches, so a little bit walking the line here. But in regards to the history behind IWC as a maker and what these watches really did for the design and what they kind of stand for, I think IWC still has kind of the standard for a luxury watch of this archetype. In regards to the just third-party movement conversation, yes, this is going to be a modified Sellita caliber in here. They are souping it up quite a bit. There is an internal cage also housing the movement to resisting its magnetism, so it's not just bare bones in what they're doing here. And there's other factors in terms of the finish that you're going to get with the dial as well as with the case and the bracelet. The bracelet is very wearable on the wrist. It is going to cost you a bit more compared to, say, the ones on the strap. You do have a variety of different options to go for, but I think the clean black option is very true to that DNA that IWC has really made their own. Now, next up, we have the Omega Seamaster Railmaster. Now here's Seamaster, and then there's the question of how does this fit in here? But when looking at these pieces, I think you definitely can make the case as being strong considerations for a field watch and what the original Railmaster DNA was going for. So this one kind of hybridizes in terms of what it is, taking some Seamaster elements with the Railmaster, but why this one I feel is a bit more appropriate compared to even the Trilogy model is the fully brushed case and bracelet. It kind of fits the utility a bit more. I have reviewed this piece in the past. It was a long time ago compared to what probably we're outputting now, but even since then, this still remains one of my favorite watches from Omega, and a pretty good way to get into the brand as well. Wearable case dimensions, 40 millimeter case, lug to lug south of 47 millimeters, which is great. Nice water resistance of 150 meters and getting a coaxial movement on the inside with ups resistance against magnetism to of course fall in line with that Railmaster DNA. The foam markers on this one might be a gripe for some, but in terms of filling the void of a field watch at a luxury perspective, this I think is pretty appropriate to have on a list. And now to round us out, let's look at the Rolex Explorer, a watch intended for, you know, going up to mountaintops, right? I mean, that's what people still use it for, right? Who knows, but I think it has to be on the list here. In terms of what one we're talking about, we can talk about the new 124-270 or the 214-270. I've yet to get my hands on the new Explorer, so I'm gonna be showing some clips of the 214-270, but of course, if you've handled any of the Explorers before, you know what these are doing from a case and finishing standpoint. Very good. They're priced in a range where if you can get them, it's, again, unfortunate, I think, what's happening with some of the availability here, but no question, some of the best watches that Rolex continues to make. These watches don't give off the blingy type of aesthetic that many Rolex watches do have. Of course, not talking about the two-tone version now, but when you're going for the simple black dial, 369 markers, and just the Mercedes hands, these are just the do-it-all type of watch, both if you are going to push it for its intended purpose or going to adapt it to a modern type of use case. These are some of the best watches that you're going to find on the market, no question about it. But all right, guys, that is my list of field watches, some of the best you can find out there. I know I can't mention all of them, so please leave comments down below, other watches that should be considered here. I know there's kind of a gray area when it comes to what classifies as a field watch, so I'll let you guys determine what qualifies and what doesn't qualify even more in the comments down below. If you guys did enjoy this video, thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Really would appreciate that. Also, if you want to stay up to date with the content, sure to be following on Instagram as well, posting some great photos of watches over there, and also gives you an idea of what's coming next when it comes to videos. And then also definitely check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of 25 brands, full factory warranty for all the brands that we carry, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support. Also have actual dedicated watch specialists that you can jump on the phone with as well if you have a question about anything you're looking to purchase, so definitely take advantage of that too. But all right, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.